Alrighty, we're just going to have to put up with this, I think, and see how we go. So, g'day guys, here we go. Everyone's starting to appear now. There we go. Awesome. Red 5 standing by. What a great line that was. Right, let me start with a song, and it's a special song that I wrote for my wife because today is our 15th wedding anniversary. So 15 years ago today, the 15 best years of my life started. So with that in mind, this is a song that I wrote for my wife and that I played to her on our wedding day. Hopefully it all sounds good at your end. Come dance with me, we'll own the stars forever. Come take my hand, we'll walk this path together. Well, I remember the first time I saw you smile. I heard you laugh and it was magical. Oh, how I hung on every moment, every word. But time seemed against us. Come dance with me, we'll own the stars forever. Come take my hand, we'll walk this path together. We were standing at the altar, there were nerves and joyous rapture and beautiful you. Oh, a free and total gift of self, a life lived completely for the other. Come dance with me, we'll own the stars forever. Oh, come take my hand, we'll walk this path together. And when we've shuffled off this mortal coil, we've run this race and time has no more for us. We will look back on the paths we've walked, the race we've run, and we will know He was leading us on. Oh, come dance with me, we'll own the stars forever. Oh, come take my hand, we'll walk this path together. So there you go. That was a song that I wrote for my wife and played to her on our wedding day 15 years ago today. So, yeah. Thank you for all those happy anniversary messages. Clap, clap, clap. Thanks, guys. Alrighty, so shall we get into it? We've got a few things to cover as I adjust this camera. Thanks, Travis. So for those who have just arrived, thank you, Matthew. Yeah, thanks, Carl. Cole, K-O-U. I'm probably massacring that pronunciation, mate. Yeah, here's to 15 more. True that. Thank you, Media Maniac. Alrighty. So, thanks, Jefferson. Thanks, Davis. Alrighty. So let's get into it, shall we? We've got a full plate of things to look at this week. If I can just let me bring up the. Here we go. Oh, there it is. Okay. So first of all, last night, I don't know has anyone seen the new Netflix movie, Extremely Wicked, Shocking and Vile, the movie about Ted Bundy. probably, I think, one of America's most prolific serial killers. They reckon he killed more than the 30 victims that he was accused of killing, and got the electric chair for it. But I watched the film last night because I had a spare couple of hours. I was on the treadmill actually when I started it, and I have to say that I thought it was a bit of a wasted opportunity, this film. Zac Efron was the right choice for the role. In fact, Zac Efron was perfect in that role because he embodied so much of what Ted Bundy was. He was this very he's a pretty good looking dude, and your average serial killer, that's not how people think of them, and that's certainly not how they present. And he was good looking, he was charismatic, he had this charisma about him, and the way he presented himself in court, at the time was a big part of the whole Ted Bundy thing. A lot of people initially didn't even believe that he was guilty of it. He had this sort of cult popular following, particularly of women. And so Zac Efron in that role was great. That was an inspired choice. But the film itself, I thought was a bit of a wasted opportunity. I don't know. I mean, it needed someone like, I think, David Fincher or someone like that to actually be directing it, because it felt a bit like we were supposed to. It seemed the focus of this movie was supposed to be the relationship between Ted Bundy and this one other particular female character who he had a romantic relationship with, but it doesn't. They don't really focus enough on that, and it just doesn't feel like they've given enough time to that. So the relationship doesn't have the weight that it should. And when you get to the really shocking moment at the end of the film where it's all sort of revealed to her, basically, that it's absolutely inescapable that he was the serial killer, it just doesn't have the weight that it really should have, because it just feels like the relationship wasn't built up. So, yeah, I watched that last night. I don't know if other people have seen it, but that was my take on it. Ben Shapiro, the Ben Shapiro interview. Who's seen the interview with the BBC where Ben Shapiro was interviewed? I was over the weekend with Andrew Neil from the BBC, and in that interview, Ben Shapiro, he got quite frustrated, and before the interview had even finished, he just canned out of the interview. So that's it. Took off his mic and bailed, and did the runner. Didn't even complete the interview. Got a bit annoyed at what was going on, and then, of course, immediately a whole lot of people were, I guess, who are not fans of Ben Shapiro, then came out and said, oh, he got owned, he got destroyed. And so it's been this big question, was Ben Shapiro owned, was he destroyed? Here's my take on it. Ben Shapiro, I think, and I say this as someone who for the last 10 years plus has been involved in training, giving media training to individuals and organizations and media consultancy for groups, one of my most popular presentations I give to individuals and groups in this area is effective interview techniques, how to actually have a good media interview. So from that perspective, Ben Shapiro absolutely lost the plot, and he did things that I would advise people in my trainings not to do. And one of the first rules is you always have talking points when you go into an interview. You have basic talking points, and your talking points should be maybe 2 to 3 at most key messages, and you always fall back on and go back to your talking points. And a good media interview is where you just constantly, no matter what they ask you, the rule of thumb is always answer the question that you wanted to be asked. And so you always go back to those talking points. Well, he didn't appear to have any talking points, and I would have thought it would have been obvious that the talking points he should have had would have been actually about his book, because that was what he was there to talk about. He didn't have those, and so when I'll get to that in just a second, Travis, about his apology. Now, when it got to the point where the interview wasn't going the way necessarily Ben Shapiro wanted it to go, and he was starting to get under pressure, what you do in that situation normally is you fall back on your talking points. They're like a lifeline. They become your life preserver. You just hold on to them, and that's what that's how you navigate your way through those situations. We didn't do that. And I also noticed he got fixated on one particular point. Now, Andrew Neil, I thought the one thing I thought was odd, and I think a little bit unfair, but not majorly. But it was he used an example, one particular example. He talked about abortion as an example, and I thought in that context it didn't seem like a particularly reasoned example to use. However, as an interviewer, that's what you want journalists to do. What Andrew Neil did was he actually effectively played devil's advocate. And that's what I think good journalists should do, is no matter who the subject is, they put them on the spot, they play devil's advocate, and they ask them to defend their position effectively. And I didn't think there was anything too unreasonable about what Andrew Neil was saying, or certainly out of the ordinary in a media context. And what you should normally be able to do in these situations is actually respond by saying, well, no, this is why you're wrong, or this is why that's different, or that's why my position is this. And, or in one or two of those questions that Ben Shapiro was asked, he was asked about so he'd made moral pronouncements about how people should conduct themselves. And then, of course, Andrew Neil, or his research team, not Andrew Neil, his research team had done research about previous statements that Ben Shapiro had made, where his own actions seemed to be contradictory to what he was saying should be happening now in the public square with the way we engage with each other. And so in a situation like that, you should be able to respond to that. And you should be able to say, look, okay, here's why that example you've given is not a valid one and doesn't violate the principle I was talking about and doesn't make me a hypocrite. Or you should say, yeah, I was young, I was immature, I've been guilty of this myself, and that's a classic example of me violating these principles. But I've come to see in recent years how important these principles are. So that's the kind of answer he should have given. But instead, he got angry and he started to attack the interviewer. Never do that. This is a golden rule now in media training, is that in media engagement, is that the interviewer, particularly on a show like this, the interviewer is an extension of the audience. That a show like this with Andrew Neil will have an audience that tunes into it because they like Andrew Neil. So when you turn on the host, you are absolutely almost 100% guaranteed to alienate the audience that host has. So you don't do that. You don't do that. You try and engage with them. It's kind of at times it can be a tricky thing. But so Ben Shapiro, from a media training perspective, he absolutely failed in that context, I think, to follow some of those basic golden rules. But here's the thing, and like Travis has pointed out, to his credit, Ben Shapiro actually apologised, and he owned it. He accepted it. He could have come out and done what some people try and do. Who was the guy last week who was harassing that elderly lady and those young people outside, those young women outside the Planned Parenthood clinic? Sims, is it Brian Sims? I can't remember his name, who's a representative in that district. And what he did was he got caught big time acting like, just acting in a violent, reprehensible way. He tries to defend himself by effectively suggesting that there was really nothing wrong here and trying to deflect attention away from it. So Shapiro didn't do that. He leaned into it and he owned the mistake that he made. But here's the thing for me. I'm kind of really interested in the response. That's something that really interests me, is the way in which people have responded to this. And the way in which you had people coming out and saying he was owned and he was destroyed. And I'm going to talk more about this next week, because I just today, first thing early this morning, read a really good new article about how the discourse in the public square on both left and right is now deteriorating because we've got all of this, the dialogue of the sick burn. Did you see that sick burn I gave him? Or did you see how I took that person down? And they really didn't take anyone down. They just insulted them and called them names. And people are not really reasoning anymore. They're not talking about, here's why I think your position is false and why mine is true. And I think it's become a convenient ruse on both sides of the aisle, sadly, for people now to just say, look, let's laugh at that person, or let's call them a name, or let's insult them, and then you go, yeah, I gave them a sick burn, that showed them. But at the end of it all, it's like, yeah, but why were they wrong? And I think it's important. If someone's saying something false, you need to be able to explain why it's false and present the truth. And I don't know whether it's just a matter of people are afraid to present the truth and what they believe, or whether or not it's just that in the age of social media, it's nice and easy to do the sick burn and all the rest of it. Someone says, Ben is like a Happy Meal. Sometimes it's better than average. Sometimes it's below. You get what is written on the box. And I tend to think that way too. I would say generally, I think Shapiro has some, I'm not a huge watcher of Shapiro's content, of his network, but I do watch it. And I would have to say that I'm not a, an avid watcher, but there are moments where Shapiro's content in his network really shines. I really like Andrew Klavan, actually. I find him quite entertaining. There are moments where, like his Ben Shapiro Sunday specials, those longer interviews that he does with a person, they're quite good. But then there are moments where I find him kind of frustrating as well. And some days he's good, some days he's average. But here's the thing. Here we go. So here's the thing, though. We now specialize, though, in... that's a good point. It's a trap. Says no one wants to appear weak, even if they're wrong. So the only course is to double down and hurl insults. It's like no one ever matured out of high school. And it's really about humility. And the thing about social media is that social media doesn't really encourage humility. It encourages ego and pride. You create a fake persona. You create this perception of perfection and how awesome you are. And and as the old adage goes, on social media, you show the best, you hide the rest. And because of that, and that's become the sort of normative way of communicating often now, and a lot of these people in the media space are also very big in the social media space. That's their way of communicating. When they get into those situations, the tendency to double down and save face and protect your ego and get a bit prideful rather than just be humble and say, yeah, I stuffed up, I made a mistake, or I got it wrong, or I got my facts wrong, whatever it is. It's a lot harder to do if you're not used to doing that. But here's the thing about the denunciations. We now live in an age, I think, increasingly of what I call outrage porn. A lot of people talk about victim mentality and victimization as sort of the new currency, but I really think in a lot of ways now it's actually moved again. I think it's now outrage is the currency. And you get people who just get on social media, I'm outraged by this. I was in the local toy store and I saw there was a section of toys and it said boys' toys. And then there was a section that said girls' toys. This is outrageous. It's current year. What are they doing? They're destroying the lives of young boys and girls with this binary male-female toy presentation. And they get all outraged and they get on social media with it. And it's like the new cultural currency. It's the outrage porn is the thing. And then what happens is the mainstream media, they don't have any principles. They basically, they act like children without impulse control. And so someone tweets something about how they were in the toy store and they saw boys and girls aisles and they were outraged by it. And what does the media do? They go, man outraged at what he discovered in toy store. And they make a story out of it. It's like no one in the media is saying, hey, hold on, maybe we should be the adults in the room here and say, there's actually nothing good that will come of us just republishing someone's personal outrage, spleen venting. Jason Rasmussen says, Ben Shapiro, thug life. So, and that's the thing about Shapiro. I think Shapiro genuinely, despite the failing he had with Andrew Neil, I think he genuinely is someone who does, as a general norm, tries to be virtuous. And so I think that he is someone who will, and he has already owned and apologised for what he's done. But anyway, so we do an outrage porn now, and the media just publishes it, and everyone gets all outraged, and then everyone jumps on the outrage bandwagon with that person. Thanks, James. Very kind of you to say. And then what happens after that? We then start dealing in the denunciation or denunciation porn, depending on which side of the tracks you're on, which is where everyone jumps on the outrage bandwagon to start doing their denunciations. I denounce that toy store for having boys and girls sections. How outrageous is this? It's current year. And then other people start jumping on, I denounce that person for even making a big deal out of it. And like denunciation porn has become the big thing. And so this is what happened after Ben Shapiro. All of a sudden, everyone who's obsessed with their denunciation porn, they all get on social media and start acting like the Lord High Executioner. I am here to denounce Ben Shapiro. And I'm like, why? Yeah, Shapiro made a meal of that interview, but how does this bring goodness to the world? How does it bring anything beautiful or good to the world by you then acting as the Lord High Executioner who is here to denounce Ben Shapiro and to start insulting him? Like, this doesn't make sense. Yeah, that's right. I haven't actually, thanks for that, Geek by Day. I haven't actually caught up with that story. I literally just saw something flying past me on Twitter as I was setting up for today, so I haven't even caught up on that. He quoted her out of context to make her look bad. Look like a Nazi. Yeah, okay, yeah. Isn't that interesting? Geek by Day, when you completed your little message to me there, and the second part that was missing on the first part was the statement "like a Nazi," it automatically got held by YouTube as a suspect message. So clearly, the YouTubes are watching. Yeah, just to get my name in paper, I'll do anything to see myself in print. Ben Shapiro is an SJW, and yeah, you're right. So I don't think he's an SJW, but I think Ben Shapiro has his moments, good moments, and he has his bad moments, and he can be guilty of doing things like the way he acted in that interview was very much the way someone who doesn't want to actually answer questions would act, and who was being irrational and was getting overly emotive. My take as someone who trains people in media engagement is I looked at that whole interview and pretty early on I started to think to myself, has he come off the end of a bad day, or is he distracted? Because it didn't look like he was focused on what was actually going on. But anyway, so then you get the denunciation porn. Everyone comes out. It's my job to denounce them and tell the world what's wrong. And it just all adds to the cycle. And I don't see how it's helping at all. As I was preparing for today, I was thinking about the fact that we now live in in many ways, the most brutal age of peace, that's ever been, the most intolerant age of tolerance, the most hateful era of love. Everyone's going on about love and everything else, but a lot of the conduct in the public square, is really quite hateful and vile. So, particularly from those because I watched some of the reactions, and you can see them on Ben Shapiro's Twitter feed from people who are on the loving, compassionate left, who care about justice and everything else. And then the way they responded to a guy like Ben Shapiro stumbling and making an absolute goose of himself by walking out of an interview was they just couldn't wait to jump on it and to be as vitriolic and vile in their response as possible. And it's like, well, hold on a minute. Do you have principles, or are you only really interested in perception and power? So I put across the perception by what I tell you. I'm loving, I'm compassionate, I'm tolerant. But as soon as one of my political opponents makes a mistake, I will be the most violent, intolerant, and angry person you'll hope to meet. So I think there's a challenge for that in all of us, particularly with our online conduct. Are we actually truly principled people, or do we only get upset when people on the other side of the aisle do things wrong and we say, oh, that's awful, they're acting in a vile way, or do we actually point the finger back at ourselves and examine our own behaviour? A couple of comments come flying in. Old soul, that was my thoughts too, almost like he didn't realise he was in an interview. Yeah, and that's what it looked like to me, it just looked like he wasn't well prepared for it at all, or that he was sort of, and some of the comments he made, man, when he said to what did he say at one point, I'm a big deal, you're a no, I don't even know who you are. It's like, you just don't say those things to anyone, let alone to a journalist in a media engagement. It was just bizarre. ODA says, when Ben said to Neil, people don't know who you are, he really made himself look really, really obnoxious. He really lost it. I agree. That was like, you just don't do things like that. You just don't. Whether you purely from a strategic communications perspective, you don't do things like that. But I think even more importantly, being a genuine person of virtue, you just don't talk to other people that way. It shows a level of arrogance and hubris to talk to another person that way and say, I'm a big deal and you're a nobody. So, just shut your face. It's like, who talks to people like that? We need less megaphones and more mirrors. Yeah, and that's a challenge for all of us. I think about my own life, how it's very easy to be the megaphone and the denunciating sort of pontiff who comes in from on high and tells everyone what's wrong. But what about my own life? Chris says, Ben fell into the same trap Neil sets for everyone. He acts like an old man losing his marbles. Then it's machine gun time. Andrew, who's made top politicians run and hide. That's right. And also when Ben Shapiro accused him of being a lefty, because from what I understand of Neil, he's actually not. Andrew Neil was not a left of centre at all. Raymond says, I think Shapiro got flustered when the guy said conservatives had no ideas and pro-lifers were in the dark ages. I agree. But here's the thing, though. That's something that you might hear. It's a very typical comment you might hear from a bit of an angry progressive person who wants to attack people on the other side. So if you're in an interview setting, how do you respond to that? Well, you give a reasoned response, I think. You give an intelligent, reasoned response for why that's wrong and why your position is true. And he didn't do that. He just turned on the interviewer. What did you think of him saying that Andrew was part of the left? Yeah, and that's the thing, Davis. That's what I'm saying, because as I understand, Andrew's not on the left at all. And so for him to say that was like, there was another comment he made too about Andrew Neil not being particularly well known. You're a nobody. Well, in Ben Shapiro circles, he might be a nobody, but he's quite well known in the UK. He's a established BBC figurehead. So, like, it's an example of Ben Shapiro didn't do his research. And interestingly enough, this is another one of my successful interview technique training points, is that before you go into an interview, always do your research. Know the audience you're speaking to, so the demographic, who are they, know the interviewer, understand a bit about their perspectives and how they interview people and where they come from. And it was clear he sort of didn't do that. Daniel says, at least when I make a mistake in the shop, nobody sees or hears. If you're famous, you're under a microscope. No thanks. Yeah, you're right. And that is it. You gotta. That's why the whole denunciation, outrage porn thing is just so absurd, because drinking from a jar. It's got a handle though, so I can't really. Is this some sort of alt-right thing? It's got a British gentleman on it. Look at that. When we're talking about the BBC. So, who would want to be under that microscope? But in saying that, it also comes with the territory too. If you put yourself out there and you've got to, like, look, I'm a small, little, tiny little fish in the big, huge pond with a YouTube channel, right? But I've got to accept that there's a certain scrutiny when I put myself out there in that way that I wouldn't have if I sort of kept my mouth shut and stayed in the background. But you're right, there's often that scrutiny now is very unfair. And the way it plays out too, it's like, let's look at his Twitter history from 50 years ago. Let's look at what he wrote in his high school yearbook. Now, if he wrote something that really is quite serious and outrageous in his high school yearbook, which demands an answer, and he seems to have consistently been promoting those same bad ideas, then, there's a case to be made. But often it's just absurd, the level of scrutiny that people are put under now. It's almost, and this is the funny thing, again, it's a hypocrisy, because there's this whole idea that these people are supposed to be virtuous saints in an age where we don't actually teach virtue or encourage it. In an age where we tell people just to be, the same people who will tell you to be a self-gratifying individual will then try and turn around and say, well, someone like Ben Shapiro should be a self-giving and virtuous man. It's like, why? C.S. Lewis wrote about this. C.S. Lewis was great on this. And there's this great quote from C.S. Lewis about, basically, what would you expect in an age where we have men without chests, where we haven't taught men to actually be virtuous? You can't expect them to suddenly start acting with virtue. It doesn't work that way. Chris says, I think Andrew got in trouble with the BBC. That's right, over his coverage of Trump during the election. Okay, so Travis says, not trying to go off topic. I'm not a racist, but, and whatever comes next, I'm not trying to go off topic, but it's fine, mate, Travis. Not trying to go off topic, but has the fandom menace / Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers messaged you to join up sometime? No, I haven't heard from him. So I'm always welcome and open to hearing from him. One thing I'm trying to do a bit more of this year is a bit more collaboration. As you'll notice, there's been a couple already on the channel this year, and I've got quite an exciting collaboration, I think, with someone I've been looking forward to speaking to coming up in the next couple of weeks, early June actually. And I think it's going to be good when we're going to have a good little conversation. And I think most of you will appreciate it too. Yeah, Andrew Neil is a conservative. Thanks, Nerd Girl, you're right. Okay, so no, wait, I haven't heard from Jeremy at Geeks and Gamers yet though. So, but I'm always open to. So, those of you, I know several of you who've been in contact with him saying, look, he should get in touch. It might be that he doesn't feel I'm a good fit for what he's doing. That's totally fine. That's the way it works. But I'm always open to that. Okay. The next topic, next cab off the rank, Mother's Day. Mother's Day was on Sunday here in New Zealand, in this part of the world. I believe in other parts of the world it's not always celebrated at this time of year, but here in New Zealand, and I think in Australia as well, and lots of places around the world, it was Mother's Day on Sunday. And it was interesting. You'll see on the promo for this particular live stream, I said, what's wrong with Mother's Day? What's the problem with Mother's Day? I don't think there's a problem with Mother's Day at all. I think it's awesome. One of the things I did for my wife, I went away hunting on Friday night. I went for an overnight hunt. And for those who are wondering, I don't hunt for sport. I only hunt for food and for pest control. Just to be clear, okay? So just in case anybody thinks, what's going on there? But I went away on an overnight hunt We stayed out on Friday night on the side of a hill. It was beautiful under the stars. It's actually coming into autumn and winter here, but it was an amazing night. We didn't have a tent or anything. We were out under the open. And then we got up at 3 a.m. the next morning, had breakfast, and climbed this very steep hill. And we initially thought we were going to get some pigs. We found a pig's nest and ended up with a deer. So we got venison in the freezer, which is just lovely. But anyway, so I came home Saturday evening, and then it's Mother's Day on Sunday. So I said to my wife, just take the day off. I'll take care of all the meals. I'll sort out breakfast. That's usually the worst time of the day with our 5 wild beasts. I'll do breakfast. Then we'll head off to church. It's what we do in our family on Sundays. Head off to church together. I'll take care of lunch. I'll take care of dinner. And you can just relax. Do what you want to do. Put your feet up. Watch some Netflix. Read a book. Don't worry about the kids. Hide away in the bedroom, and I'll try and keep them out of your hair. And so we had quite a great Mother's Day, and it was a good way to I guess honour my wife for the profound and amazing gift of motherhood that she brings to the world, in particular, especially to our little world here in our family. But here's the problem: when Mother's Day kicked off, obviously you get a lot of people on social media doing cool things like saying Happy Mother's Day to their mums and posting photographs and stuff like that. But then came the usual, this is this typical thing now where it's like we can't just be content to do something to celebrate and to celebrate, like have a good, we don't do rest and festival well. So we don't have a good festival. Like Mother's Day is a festival and we should be celebrating, right? But what do you get? You get people who say, I've got a problem with Mother's Day. And there were people on social media, and I saw a bit of this. So first of all, I see a tweet that says, this Mother's Day, here's to all the single dads out there. Happy Mother's Day. And I saw several people sharing that. I'm thinking to myself, no, single dads have actually their own day. It's called Father's Day. And being a single dad, far out. I can't even imagine it. A lot of hard work must go into that, and it's a pretty amazing endeavour to do that and to actually be a good dad in the process. But Mother's Day is a day to celebrate mothers and mothering and motherhood and the feminine genius, not dads. That's not what that day's for. And then there was a lot more of this flying around too. I saw people saying things like, I have an issue with Mother's Day because of all the women who can't have children or haven't had kids and who, obviously struggling with the burden, the cross of infertility. My wife and I, when we got married 15 years ago today, we thought that having kids was just going to be a walk in the park. You just have special mummy-daddy hugs, and next thing you know, you got kids. And it didn't work out that way for us. And we had a solid two years or so where we were thinking, oh my gosh, are we infertile? Are we going to have kids? It was this really big thing. And then all of a sudden it clicked. And hey, presto, now there's 5 of them, 5 wild units running around the place at our house. What an awesome gift that is. But I kind of had a little insider window into what some people must be struggling with if they're struggling with the burden of infertility. It must be really awful to be in that situation. But to then turn around and say, well, Mother's Day, is not good because people have infertility and it's a hard day for them. And I think, well, hold it a minute though. This is about celebrating motherhood and mothers in our midst. And yes, we should single them out and celebrate them, because that's what today's about. And I thought about it in the context of your birthday. Imagine it was your birthday or someone else's birthday. One of your co-workers has a birthday at the office or at the on the building site or at g'day Nick. Thanks mate. Enjoying the streams myself. Actually, it's great to be into this. Finally got into live streaming. But it's imagine it's one of your co-workers' birthdays, and someone says, over in the next cubicle, hey, it's John's birthday. Happy birthday, John. And then you piped up and said, well, is it really fair to single out John? It's not my birthday today. Will someone have consideration for me? Where's my birthday celebration? Or let's today remember all the people who don't have birthdays. It's like, no, let's just celebrate John and his birthday. It's celebrate Mother's Day, the same thing. Tom says to me, why do I go to church? Well, because I'm a believer, Tom, and I think it's profoundly important. It's an essential place of community. It's a place of worship for me, and it's just fundamental to who I am and our family life. That's why I go. Alrighty, so that's my little rant about Mother's Day. Yeah, I saw that. Hanafi. Hanafi's off to watch The Phantom Menace. Good man. All right. Can't please everybody. You know, I live by Winston Churchill's motto, folks. You can't please all of the people. So you can please all of the people some of the time. You can please some of the people all of the time, but you can't please all of the people all the time. So don't break your back trying to do that. Alrighty, Alyssa Milano. I'm sure you're all aware of Alyssa Milano's great moment of activism in the last few days, where she called for a sex strike, got on Twitter and called for a sex strike in response to the Georgia fetal heartbeat abortion law that's been proposed. As I understand, it hasn't been passed yet. It's just in the House working its way through. And in response to a law which proposes the absolutely outlandish idea that maybe we shouldn't deliberately kill an innocent human being if they've got a heartbeat, because that's the heart of it, right? Let's be honest with what's going on here. She says, this is outrageous, we should have a sex strike. Tom says to me, do you think that the church is a tool to repress and control people like you? No, I don't. Absolutely not. Church is a place of what? So for me, it's a place of worship. It's a place of community. And the reality is that every one of our lives, if you don't, I live by the old adage of Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan, great fan of Bob Dylan. And one of the songs that I really love of his is Serve Somebody. You got to serve somebody. It's a great song. If you haven't heard it, go and listen to it on YouTube after this. Everybody serves somebody. And if you don't, it may be the devil, it may be the Lord, he says, but everybody serves somebody. You might be working City Hall, you might be a pauper on the street. Everybody's got to serve somebody. And so I've made a choice. So my life is not about being a slave to other things. That's a decision that I've made. So yeah, everybody, whether they like it or not, will serve something. Far better to make the choice yourself than end up being enslaved by things that you didn't choose that start controlling you. Davis says, sometimes I don't want to get up from bed. The world is crazy, crazy, man. Who would think Mother's Day being political? Right-winger says, sorry, right-winger, I initially read your name as right-winger. Now, some on the left might say, oh, look, it is true, but sorry, that is right-winger. That Georgia heartbeat bill was signed into law. Oh, so it was signed into law. There you go. Get your facts right. And then, so it proposes the outlandish idea that we should never deliberately kill. We should never have a law on the books that says it's okay to deliberately kill innocent human beings who've got a heartbeat. I'm okay with that. I'm really okay with that. Those of you who know me and know this channel know that I am also pro-life in my ethic, and I've got really good reasons for being pro-life. They're non-religious, and it's basic human reason for me. If the evidence and the weight of evidence and the best of human reason pointed towards being pro-choice, I'd be pro-choice, but I'm not, because that's not where the evidence and the reason points. So I'm pro-life, right? A merry unbirthday to you. Thanks, Nerd Girl. But anyway, so Alyssa Milano calls for a sex strike. And then she tweeted this on Twitter. This is an actual tweet. I can't show it to you, but what I'll do is I will post a link in the description below so you can read it later on. She said this: we love sex and fight for our bodily autonomy. There are lots of alternatives to cis men. Protect your vaginas, ladies. She actually tweeted this. Men in positions of power are trying to legislate them. Well, no, that's not what's going on here. Then she said hashtag sex strike. Now, that in itself is just a bizarre tweet. But then this is what happened. A Twitter user called Sam responded to that tweet of Alyssa Milano's and said this: not all ladies, quote unquote ladies, have vaginas. Some have penises. Oh, yes. Sorry. It's not hard to put cis, quote unquote, before ladies, quote unquote, but you chose not to try, and that's transphobic behavior. That's the response. I'm sorry, this is just, I'm looking at this and I'm going, what? What? So did you hear that? Not all ladies are actually ladies. Sometimes men are ladies too. And so she attacked her for being transphobic. But wait, it gets better. Because then Alyssa Milano replied, and this is how Alyssa Milano replied, "You are right. If I could edit the original tweet," she's talking about there, "I would. Thank you." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the state of things right there. That's it. It's just an absurdity. The whole thing is just an absurdity. And I'm thinking to myself, yep, that's what happens when your culture is in trouble. That's what a culture in trouble looks like. Because there's nothing principled about any of that. There's nothing truthful about any of that. That is what a culture in trouble looks like. One little short, brief tweet exchange sums up so many of the problems. But yeah, that is just bizarre. And in response to Melissa, I would say this to you. I would say, we love sex and fight for our bodily autonomy. So do I as a pro-lifer. I love sex. I think it's a good, sacred, and beautiful thing. And I also fight for bodily autonomy. And that's why I don't believe you should ever destroy the body of another human being, an innocent human being, without their consent. It's pretty simple for me. If you're going to talk about bodily rights, then you've got to extend those bodily rights to all human beings. And even if you want to talk about only in the context of females, then you should be talking about bodily rights for all females, including those who have yet to be born, because they have bodies too. So if bodily rights are so important that they must be protected, and I believe they are important and should be protected, then they should be protected equally for everyone. Otherwise, we are just being arbitrary and that we don't have an objective standard of human rights. It's pretty simple for me. The whole framework falls to bits once you start saying, well, there's an entire class of people and we won't treat them the same way as we expect to be treated ourselves. Okay, so yeah, that's my thoughts on it anyway. But man, what an absolute mess. Here we go. Sorry, some of your comments. We've wandered into the grey zone here clearly because some of your comments are getting held up. Here we go. Are we still on? Or have I frozen? I've frozen. Can everyone hear me still or not? Okay. Yeah, someone's asking, did the screen freeze? Let me see if I can fix this. Can everyone hear me though still?